have our very first artist chat that coincides with the exhibitions at the Clear Lake Arts Center. Today, I'm excited to introduce Barbara Simcoe. She is a professor of art at the University of Nebraska, where she teaches painting and drawing. Good morning, Barbara.
Good
How are you
morning,
today?
Dave. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about your work and your process. A lot of the people at the Clear Lake Arts Center have attended previous art talks and have really enjoyed hearing how artists go about making their work, what inspires them, where they come up with their ideas, interesting things about their process. So you being a professor of drawing and painting, this digital collage is kind of a departure from what you're used to doing. Can you tell us a little bit what inspired that or how you came about to make
Sure.
this?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been a practicing artist since the early 80s, actually, the late 70s. But I have always worked in a sort of a collage method in my paintings and in my drawings. But mostly I was doing paintings for quite a long time. And I work from multiple image sources always. But it was kind of more of a conceptual arrangement of imagery. I would never know how something would turn out. And usually it would turn out pretty good. So I kind of had a sense of space and how to work around imagery to make the separate images work together. So fast forward to the late 90s, I learned Photoshop and I taught it at Metro, which is a community college here in Omaha, where I live now. So I had to learn it pretty well in order to teach it. And I thought, well, this is a good method for me to to develop ideas for my painting. So I did that, and I employed Photoshop only for paintings for a number of years. I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And then around 2004, I started making Photoshop pieces alongside my painting and drawing. So I'd have three different bodies of work: drawing, painting, and then my digital work. So I had worked a long time with appropriation imagery, but I segued around 2003, 2004, 2005 to developing my own image sources. So that's kind of like a short explanation for how I ended up in Photoshop. No, not
Okay,
Photoshop, digital imaging.
sure. Could you explain a little bit about appropriation? We may have some viewers that have heard the term but don't know how it applies to artwork.
Sure. Back in the 80s, appropriation art became very, very popular. There were some artists who directly lifted, for example, from an old master's painting or a early photographer. There's one artist in particular, Jenny Levine, who actually would show somebody's work just as her own. It was really crazy. But a lot of other artists would work from pop imagery and bring it into a painting context. And the appropriation idea kind of came out of French philosophy from the 1970s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Long story that I don't want to get into because I'm not a philosopher, and I can't even give you a very good short story or a short explanation of it. But suffice it to say, I was living in Dallas at the time. I got my master's degree at University of North Texas and then lived in Dallas for about 15 years after that. And I continued after graduate school to appropriate imagery in the context of this larger art world practice. So, but at the time also, I was working with political imagery from media sources. So it was kind of different from what was going on in New York. But it was a thing in the 80s,
Okay.
essentially. Yeah.
Where where do you get your source material? You had mentioned at first you were finding it, and now you're creating more of your source material. How do you go about doing that?
Okay, so in 2004, I had a Fulbright grant and I went to Lithuania. I lived and worked in a small city called Cholet in Lithuania. And I didn't have any materials to bring with me. And I thought, well, I'm going to start collecting my own imagery, which I did. And then so that was an introduction for me to enter the world of digital imaging for its own sake and not in service of my um, painting. So I've been doing that. I've been creating my own source imagery since then. So that's like whatever, 16 years. As time went on, I would take pictures of all kinds of things. I would look at the world, not so much like a photographer looking for still imagery. I would look for fragments of things. So I was very interested in architectural fragments, landscape imagery, a lot of water imagery, a lot of sky imagery. And I moved into working with models over the last 10 years or so. So I was able to incorporate the image female imagery into the context of all this other sort of stuff that I was working with.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. You mentioned that you had traveled and worked in another country. As an artist, does that influence or change the way you make your work? Um, I think there's a handful of artists that travel to other countries to do a body of work, and I'm just curious the reasoning or how that influences what you make or your process around making.
That's a really good question. I'm sort of a travel junkie. I like to travel as much as possible. The cost of traveling, of course, over the years gets very, really expensive. And I've gotten university grants to travel. Being in another culture, just, you go into other people's um, cities, towns, landscapes, and there's just, you have to look at it in a new way, in a way that inhabitants don't look at it. So there's usually, like architectural elements and just being in another place, out, overseas in Europe, that's where I've done most of my traveling, has generated for me just a freshness in terms of seeing and looking for images that I'm interested in and that move me in some form or another. So yeah, travel has influenced me a whole lot over the years.
When you travel, do you meet and work with other artists, or is it more of a solo venture?
It's been mostly a solo venture. When I was in Lithuania, I had to teach a course, and I met a lot of artists who lived in that community. So that was kind of cool. But I had a artist residency at the Rome Academy of Art in Rome, and lived there for 2 weeks. And so that was not collaborative, but I was around a lot of artists and art historians. And so, like I said, it wasn't collaborative work, but I was in a community. That's really the only residency I've ever participated in. Residencies are great, and I wish I could do more of them, but with teaching and just complexity, and I already have a really great studio here in Omaha, it just hasn't been something I pursued very much, but I will probably in the future. I'm going to work more towards doing residencies.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the body of work that you're exhibiting now at the Clear Lake Art Center. How did that begin?
Well, that's a really good question. It came out of an investigation of what it means to be a woman in a context of this sort of surreal environment that I generate or I create, I should say, in my work. It's partly based on archetypes of what it means to be a woman, in terms of like the great mother, the different phases that women go through: child, woman, crone, which is a word for an older woman. And my concentration has been on younger women, except some of the pieces in the exhibition they're not of myself as a model. They're not self-portraits. They're meant to be, I guess, given my age, the crone.
Okay.
Um, so I'm interested in creating spaces that are, I would say, I hesitate to say spiritual because they're not religious at all. They're not religious paintings at all, but they're about the subconscious and how the subconscious can generate ideas by looking at lots and lots of different kinds of images and looking at things that move me to create a piece. So I might start with one of the poses that I photographed, and then have a lot of other images in a Photoshop piece I'm working on, and I cull it down, and I sort of work very intuitively. So the body of work that's in the exhibition has a wholeness to it that as a body of work that artists are always pursuing in terms of their careers and just what they want to do as artists. But I mean wholeness also by way of thinking of fragmentation as being a basis for finding wholeness, like internally. So so that's kind of a very vague way of saying what the work is about. I'm interested in sort of the ethereal, the unknown. I'm interested in projecting mystery. It's like, why is this going on? Why is this figure in this environment that's unreal? So I'm interested in the real as it segues like liminally in this in-between space between reality and the subconscious.
Okay, interesting. I could see where it can appeal to certain people that really enjoy representational work, and but you kind of push it a little bit, so people actually have to kind of think and have that and explore that space between, which maybe we don't always do in our everyday lives. Okay, okay. Where do you see your work continuing from here? Are there things?
No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Are there things that you feel you are headed towards or are wanting to explore next?
Yes,
Okay.
very much so. I've kind of have gone through a phase over the last 4 or 5 years of questioning why I'm doing what I'm doing. What's the point?
Okay. Sure.
uh, do I want to even continue? I mean, these are sort of like really existential thoughts, but I mean, it's what I've kind of been going through for a long time. To speak honestly about my work, I have been much happier with my digital work than I have been with my painting and drawing, like over the last 5 years or so. So the
Okay.
digital work has really sustained me a lot in terms of my art making practice. Not that I stopped painting, I continued to paint, but I wasn't satisfied. So about around the turn of the year, early this year, January, I started feeling a lot better about things, about myself as a practitioner of painting and drawing. And I think the switch was because I want to revisit some of the issues that I was concerned with in the 80s. And that was, I was interested in political imagery. I'm not so interested necessarily in political imagery, but making my work tougher, if that makes sense. so that the interactions of figures, I want to have more figures in my pieces now rather than singular images. Most of the pieces in the exhibition are singular images with human images, with the exception of one or two pieces. So I want to populate my paintings more with multiple images that are more in conflict with each other, to express maybe an internal conflict. I mean, it could be a lot of other things. The cultural conflicts we're in right now. I mean, the world is a mess, as we all know. And I kind of want to do something about that in my work.
Okay.
So that's kind of a significant shift in the way I've been thinking here recently.
Okay.
Oh,
Interesting.
the other thing is, there are some, I'm interested also in revisiting for myself the nude figure and sort of creating a vulnerability in with the figures. I think most of my figures have a sense of being vulnerable, you
Hmm.
know, vulnerable kind of presentation and pose, posture, gesture, but being a nude and opening yourself to greater vulnerability has made me think more about, well, maybe that can fit in somehow to the kind of more the tougher compositional arrangements, and that create meaning, that can bring me to another place
Okay.
in the way I'm thinking about things and the work I make.
Can you tell us a little bit about the connection between the collage work and painting? You said you still continue to paint, and that it has informed that, and you've become, I'm not sure what the word you use, more satisfied with your painting through this digital collage. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how technology has influenced art making, and specifically your art making.
That's a really good question. Well, you know, as I was talking about the late 90s, early 2000s, I was able to design all my work, I think I said this, in Photoshop,
Hmm.
but it created a situation for my paintings and drawings that was a little odd, in the sense that I then knew what the image was going to look like. Before technology, I would do some drawings, but I would look at, you know, I always did some drawings, but they were always, you know, very loose and you could barely see what was going on. They were more like my thinking through what should go where. So technology kind of, in terms of painting and drawing for me, really created a shift in, now I know what it's going to look like, because I would
Hmm.
develop the ideas in Photoshop. So that was kind of a weird, kind of a switch in how technology brought my work to another kind of way of thinking about how to create images. So the technology had a deep influence on me, I would say. Um, I don't, what's interesting though, is I don't think of myself as being super techno savvy. You know,
Oh, sure.
I,
Interesting.
I, I use technology as, in terms of how I can be an artist, but I'm not a, I'm not totally like, hooked into technology. I find it useful as a tool among many tools.
Right, right.
You
Which artists have, I think, have done for centuries, is using the latest technology as a
Sure.
tool to achieve what they're looking to achieve.
Right.
And I think that's really great. That's interesting. Um, do you see yourself moving more towards um, technology only in your art creation, or do you think there always be kind of a little digital and a little analog in your process?
There will always be analog, always. I will never give up painting and drawing. It's always been a challenge, and it does something really different working in a computer. It's now my Photoshop pieces, my digital pieces always take a long time.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I actually do painting, and when I make selections and I have to separate images out and kind of make them meld together. But painting and drawing have this tactile engagement with a surface, and that cannot really be replicated for me in the digital landscape in terms of making my own work. I know a lot of people, a lot of my students will generate their ideas on a pad. They'll draw on a pad,
Okay.
like an iPad, tablet, I should say, over drawing. And I'm always I don't look down. I let students kind of develop as they need to develop.
Sure.
But I don't think anything can replace that analog engagement with a tool and a surface
Okay.
that's real. It's not digital. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What kind of advice would you give in general to young artists out there as far as a path for their career? What are some key points or advice you would give someone?
First of all, keep working. What I always tell my graduating students, especially the Bachelor of Fine Arts students, we have two different degrees at UNO, a basic bachelor's degree and then a BFA, a Bachelor of Fine Arts. So my engagement in teaching is a lot of it is with the advanced students. And when I tell them, and some of them really want to go to graduate school, and I'm like, okay, that's a good idea, but you need to give yourself some time to see what your commitment level is, to see what your desire level is, to see how much you need to be doing this art making. And so the first thing I tell them is test yourself and see how committed you are. We have a sort of a burgeoning youth art scene here in Omaha right now. There's a lot of little pop-up galleries, and a number of my former students are really involved with showing here in Omaha and Lincoln, and a couple of them have had shows in, some art centers in Nebraska, kind of more, further into Nebraska, not just Lincoln and Omaha. So that's a really good thing. And, website, Instagram, keep your work out there, start trying to get into shows like juried exhibitions outside the region, like more nationally, see if you can do that. And then in continuing to look for solo exhibition opportunities. The trick with that, though, with young artists, is having enough work to do that, because you really have to work a while through graduate school and beyond to develop a body of work that can be in those kinds of venues. So, but the main thing is keep on working.
Yes, I was going to say, so that's really the big takeaway is you must just continue to work and produce things. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let's shift gears a little bit. I think it's interesting too to talk about how other things in our lives kind of influence our work. Are you an avid reader? Do you have anything you're reading that kind of influences how you make art?
How I make art, that's a really good question. I have like tons of art books with lots of pictures in them. So I'm very interested in, I have reading. I read a lot of detective stories, and I read a lot of sort of, there's a Tibetan nun who's actually American, Pema Chodron, and I read her a lot. There's a lot of interesting advice, and how you can make your life fuller and mostly more whole. So I read that, but I spend a lot more time, honestly, looking at imagery from art history.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I travel in Europe, there's so much there, I mean, churches and museums and just the architectural structures that exist in these very, very old places. It's like that interests me more when I go to a place than going to a contemporary museum or art gallery. Not that I don't go to those, but
Right.
I seem to be I seem to get more inspired in some ways by old art.
Okay.
Like, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You've talked about that, the architecture and the sense of community of other cities. Do you still find that in your own community? Are there things that you discover that inspire your work uh, within your own city?
Like here in Omaha.
Yeah.
Um, there are some artists whose work I really like, and they make work that is not like mine at all. And I wouldn't say that they're inspiring to me as much as I admire their commitment, and I find their work to be really interesting. And but I wouldn't say there's anyone here locally who is like a mentor for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm I'm not. I think everybody needs mentors at some point throughout their lives. I'm not in need of one right now.
Sure, sure.
So, but yeah.
Has there been artists in the past, or I think often there's a question about what famous artists or artists that we might be familiar with have influenced you or your work over time?
That's a really good question. One of my favorite artists is Piero della Francesca. I don't know if are you familiar with Piero?
I, I
He
think so, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen his work. He was an early Quattrocento, as the Italians would say, 15th century early Renaissance artist. And in the early Renaissance, there were all these discoveries scientifically and in terms of perspective was this huge, huge invention. So Piero, a lot of those paintings from that era were very still and
Okay.
very focused on a scene. The drama was minimal in some ways, even like, with a lot of religious not sculpture, painting. So Piero's work is very kind of architectonic and very still and just beautifully painted with that sort of gorgeous Tuscan light that he's able to create. I mean, it's not like I think about him all the time. He's kind of, I did a series of paintings, small panels, like, about this big, and with, oil painting on panel, and worked very thinly with my paint films. And it's not like I was thinking about Piero, but sometimes I would, and just trying to capture a sense of light. And light is important in my digital work too. The kind of daylight, dusk, dawn, how light affects, water, how I light my models and so on. So there's Piero. And then there are, I really enjoy Baroque artists a lot. I'm kind of revisiting them now in terms of the way I want, like I was talking about how I want to shift my concerns in my painting and also the digital work. So Baroque artists I've been very influenced by. So I'm kind of going through art history, or not all of art history, but I also have a lot of interest in Hindu art, Buddhist art, and painting and sculpture. and the ancient Middle East, of all things.
Okay.
That just fascinates me. It just, like Assyrian art or, Sumerian art. I'm just very moved by it and find it to be very interesting.
Can you kind of pinpoint what it is about that art form that appeals to you?
I think what it is they, all the work, I mean, the architecture, of course, of those cultures. I think what it is I don't think of myself as a like a real super colorist, but color like in Hindu or Persian and Hindu miniature painting is just gorgeous. So there's the color, but there's, compositionally, I always enjoy the way those paintings are structured. Um, but it's also how stories are told in like, for example, Hindu painting or Persian painting, any kind of miniature painting, like even from the Middle Ages on. Um, so I find it to be interesting the way narrative is structured, and the way stories can be conveyed in a single image. But I'm a big fan of sculpture as well. And so it's like the Sumerian, well, there isn't any painting left from those cultures. I'm sure there was a lot of painting, but it just hasn't survived. But the sculptural imagery has always fascinated me in terms of form, this amazing presence that a lot of this stuff has. So there's
Yeah.
that. So I like the ancient world, and I like, but there's a lot of modernist work that I really enjoy and respect enormously, like Manet, and then the surrealists, of course, have always interested me. In terms of contemporary work, um, well, the artists of the 80s interested me a lot. There are a lot of really good painters out there right now, and a lot of really good photography. There's sort of been a blossoming of painting over the last 20 years. You probably know this, but somebody's always has been killing off painting since the invention of photography.
Right.
Photography is dead. We don't need painting anymore because of that. And then with Dada, the Dada movement in the late teens in Europe, what do we need painting for? Then there's the whole idea mid-century of the end of art. Who even needs any art at all? Everything's been done, and what's the point? And but throughout all that, painting has survived. Photography is alive and well. Photography, in many respects, in most respects, I would say, and for me, all respects, is as important as painting, drawing, sculpture. But there's a lot of more political engagement in the artwork since the 90s, I would say, primarily. I mean, there was a lot of it in the 80s as well that is more prominent than many other kinds of conceptual um, agendas. Mine is about, some of the stuff that I've been talking about here. Mine is not so much about, is not at all, has not at all been about politics the way it was in the 1980s. So, you find your niche, and sometimes the niche is small, you know,
Right.
and then there are bigger ones, and then there are huge ones. And so, there's room for everything, I would say. So there's a lot of contemporary work that I do admire quite a bit, and a lot, not just painting, but, installation work, media, new media work. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I think is very, very powerful.
Absolutely. I think artwork is a really great way to communicate.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and that's why I guess I personally feel that it's not something that will ever die, because it's just another form that we can communicate our ideas and thoughts to each other about our own human experience.
Right. No, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well,
Um, Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for chatting with us today.
Well,
It's
thank
really,
you. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, I'm very delighted that you have done this interview and you did a wonderful job on the website. And thank you again for the exhibition and how beautifully you installed it. So I've just been very happy with the whole experience working with the Clear Lake Arts Center. It's been really cool.
Well, wonderful. Great. Yeah, we're really excited to be able to share your work, and having our conversation, I think, is a really great added layer to it. It will give some people some new insight into it, and
Yeah.
hopefully, like our one of our goals at the Clear Lake Arts Center is really to inspire people to engage in their own creativity and art making. So,
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it's great that you have that up there in
yes.
North Central Iowa. It's great.
Thank you for being with us today.
You bet. Thank you.